So thank you for coming out tonight as a part of the International Education Week series of events to celebrate the benefits of international and international exchange. In this context, we're going to focus on employment and careers in diplomacy, and in particular, the U.S. Foreign Service. So I've brought an expert to do that. Mr. Alan DeBose is currently is a U.S. Department of State diplomat in residence based in Atlanta. So he works throughout the southeast part of Atlanta, or southeast part of the U.S. to connect individuals with the careers. He joined the U.S. Foreign Services as a management officer in 2005, and I'll ask all of you to make sure you know what that means by the end of this time together. He's worked in the private sector beforehand for more than 17 years. Mr. DeBose served abroad in Mexico, Ecuador, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, as well as domestically in assignments where he's traveled extensively throughout Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. I'm sure he's got lots of stories we can hear about tonight. And hopefully he'll have an opportunity to share insights and information about careers in the Foreign Service and then broadly international diplomacy. So we do expect to have some time for questions and look forward to the things that you have lined up to ask. Without any further delay, I'll pass it over to you, Mr. DeBose.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And yeah, I have stories, but we'll see how it goes. So hopefully today we're going to talk about the U.S. Foreign Service. You're going to have a better understanding, and I'll answer any questions if you have anything unique. But otherwise, I will go ahead and share my screen, and we can start with my presentation. And just want to make sure everybody can see this. And let's try to get to the slideshow. All right, is that full slide? Do you see that now? All right, then here we go. Okay, what I'm going to note is, again, my name is Alan DeBose, and I'm a diplomat in residence. And what that means is I'm one of 16 people who is spread across the United States, basically trying to recruit the next generation of the best and brightest so they can be in our embassies and consulates abroad and headquarters in DC, taking care of U.S. interests abroad. Throughout this conversation, you're going to hear a mantra from me about two websites, careers.state.gov and usajobs.gov. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me after this, the first thing I'm going to say is, oh, I can set an appointment. Have you looked at careers.state.gov? And the reason I do that is because it really is an excellent site, and it provides context and understanding for any conversation or questions that may come up. So if you do need to contact me to set an individual appointment, that would be at dirsouth@state.gov. And again, I'm going to refer, again, careers.state.gov, usajobs.gov. With that said, you're wondering maybe, why does this guy have this old picture here? And the answer is because this is the reason I ended up joining the U.S. Foreign Service. As you heard, this is, I don't call it second career, but I'd say midlife change for me, because I was in the private sector. I'm somebody who had my MBA in finance, and I wanted to go out and make money. And I was doing that for a long time, well over a decade, when I happened to see this ad in the newspaper, and it had Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State at the time, saying, we're looking for administrative people. And it crossed my mind, maybe like some of you, I've heard of the U.S. Foreign Service. In my case, being in the DC area, I actually knew some people who had been in the Foreign Service, but I never thought of it for management type people or administrative finance type people. Just never really crossed my mind. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about as we go through this, is how whatever you're doing may actually be a better fit than you realize. So let's start with the mission of the Department of State and U.S. Foreign Service. As far as the Department of State is concerned, again, we lead America's foreign policy abroad, not domestically, abroad. So whatever the position of U.S. foreign policy is from the White House down, we represent that when we're abroad. We take orders from DC, so we have a situation where whatever the interests are that come from the main state, we implement it in the Foreign Service when we're at our embassies and consulates. The Department of State has led the U.S. foreign policy and interests since 1789 as the first federal agency, and we started reorganizing into the Foreign Service, being a subset of the U.S. Department of State in 1924. And then there was the Foreign Service Act in 1946 that started to formalize what we currently see as the Foreign Service. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. with special purpose offices spread throughout the U.S. For example, we have a passport center in downtown Atlanta to help people with passports. We have an Office of Foreign Missions. I think the closest one is in Miami. And this is where consulates from other countries may exist and they want to interface with the Department of State. So that's why we have offices spread across the US for reasons like that. There are 276 posts abroad spread across 191 countries, and you may wonder, why don't the numbers add up? And the answer is, in some countries we have an embassy, majority we just have an embassy, but in some countries where the US has a lot of unique interests, we may have consulates. So the difference between those two numbers is probably consulates. For example, in somewhere like Mexico, we have Mexico City where the embassy is, but we have several consulates in Merida and Hermosillo and Guadalajara and a lot of different places. We have about 77,000 employees, only about 14,000 are actually foreign service employees. 10,000 are civil service employees who are normally based in the DC area. They are supporting the US Foreign Service role, but much of the work they do is very similar to other agencies. And the biggest number we have are locally employed staff, and this is something most people don't think about, but the Foreign Service staff, they're in and out like military. Every 2 to 3 years, we're rotating through. So the locally employed staff are people, sometimes American, sometimes not, but they are people who are hired by that local embassy or consulate, and they provide the archival knowledge and the day-to-day hands-on work for a lot of the things we do. So we depend on them many times to get us acclimated as soon as we touch ground at our new post and introduce us to the right people and you show us where the bathrooms are. So what are some common motivations for joining the Foreign Service? And before I go any further, some of these photos are stock, but some of these are real photos that we took. This is our operations center, 24/7. This place never closes. And the only reason I stopped here to talk about it is, on TV, you see things sometimes that look really nice, and then you see them in real life and you say, this is it, this is reality. This is one place that really looks like something you would see on TV, and it has that buzz going on. So you go in there and you see people picking up the phone and standing up and say, pick up line 3. And this is just going on all the time. And you see, I don't know if you can see there, but they have a bunch of different TV channels going on and all the different times in the world. So that's an exciting place, is our operations center. And that's because the world never stops. So it's at one point when it's midnight here, it's noon somewhere else. So some of the common motivations for joining the U.S. Foreign Service include supporting U.S. interests and security initiatives. So for example, some people say, I want to serve somehow. And they may choose Peace Corps, they might choose military as a career. Well, we think that we are an excellent option for those who want to support U.S. interests and security initiatives because we're the right mix of supporting U.S. interests and also having very engaging and fun professional careers. Many people want to be part of a unique community and be on the front line of service. So a unique community, yeah, we're a clique, but it's a fun clique. So for example, I was walking through the Buenos Aires airport and I saw a guy carrying a duffel bag that had the Department of State logo on it. So I started talking to him. Before you knew it, there were about 5 people we knew in common. So we have kind of a kinship because of our shared experiences. And as far as being on the front line of service, I always tell somebody, if you ever turn on the news and you see a breaking report, you see something blowing up overseas, chances are the first person who's going to be there to send information back to that operations center is going to be someone from that embassy or consulate. So whether or not DOD needs to get involved, we're the closest ones on the ground. So we are usually the point for whatever issues are going on in the world. Public service. A lot of people really do want to do something to help. And one of our responsibilities is taking care of US citizens when they're overseas. So you can imagine how rewarding it is as an employee of the Foreign Service when maybe an American contacts you and says, my passport was lost or stolen. I don't really speak the language real well. I need help. Can you help me? And then you go to help them and you see the smile on their face because you realize you truly are adding value. One other thing is career-long training and academic growth, including foreign languages. So we have our own school. It's called Foreign Service Institute. We do what's called Tradecraft, which is teaching whatever we want you to learn about the job you're going to be doing. And we also have foreign languages that we teach there. So while it can never hurt somebody to join the U.S. Foreign Service with the language already, it's not required. And if somebody has the skills we're looking for, our attitude is we'll teach you the language. We're not too concerned about that. We have a cadre of teachers who are all native speakers. So you will learn the unique accents, you'll learn the culture, not just the language if you are a foreign service person who's receiving language training to serve abroad. Job challenge and work diversity. Oh goodness, you'll never be bored as far as your work is concerned when you're overseas because there's always some unique challenges just kind of built in. And I have a lot of colleagues, guys I've known for years and years and years, and I'll talk to them and they'll be complaining about their job, saying, oh, let me tell you what I had to do. And I'll listen to them and I'll say, yeah, I had to do something kind of like that, but I had to do it in Spanish. And then they just get quiet because they realize this is a unique job and it brings with unique challenges. So people who like that challenge, who like that training, they tend to do well in the U.S. Foreign Service. And of course, the fascinating global lifestyle and travel. That's the part everybody thinks about where you're overseas and you get to travel to all these exotic places. And guess what? It's true. So for example, I have this picture here. This is my daughter who's now in college, but this was taken when she was going on her college road trip thing. And she naively thought I was going to pay for her to go to a private school in New York City. So I said, hey, you can go visit. And oh, by the way, I know somebody at the UN. Do you want to maybe see if I can get a tour for you? And you see right there. So these sort of connections we can make, and this global lifestyle can be fun. It can be a great experience. I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but these are essentially the places I've been for maybe anywhere from a week to 3 years throughout my career. And it's been exciting. Every one I has a story. I have pictures in my mind about these places, and it's just part of the lifestyle that's very, very fun. And Uncle Sam paid for me to go to each of these places. That picture on the right you recognize as Dubai. It was just one day I happened to be driving and said, oh, it's nice and pretty here. Let me get a picture. So this is something that we take for granted when we're posted overseas. So we talked about the Department of State and the U.S. Foreign Service, and we talked about why some people choose to join or why it might be attractive to you. Now we're going to focus on the career options when people want to become diplomats. Our Foreign Service officers and Foreign Service specialists are basically the two categories of diplomats we have for people who want to join the U.S. Foreign Service. Officers are often referred to as generalists, and the reason is they're required to serve different roles throughout their careers in one of 5 career tracks. So as you're going to see as I go along, you really just have 5 choices when it comes to career tracks if you want to be a generalist. However, part of the requirements are that you do some of those other career tracks. So I'm a management officer, that's my career track, but I've done human resources. I did one that was quasi facility management, and it's not unusual. Oh, consular, I did consular as well. And it's not unusual for people to do a lot of different roles. Usually you can figure about maybe a quarter to a third of your assignments will be outside your main career track. Now, we contrast that with specialists. Foreign Service specialists are right by the side of the generalists, sometimes literally in the office right next to it. But the difference is with their careers, they are expected to be subject matter experts in their specialties. And they tend to serve the overwhelming majority, if not all of their career doing that. So for example, if someone is a financial specialist or a human resources specialist, they should expect to be doing finance or human resources for the totality of their career. They serve overseas just as much, or maybe even more in cases than a generalist. So that's not really the issue. The issue is just, are you a generalist or are you a specialist? So let's talk a little detail about the career track. So here's one thing. You can major in anything you want in college. I've known biology majors, aquaculture, things that maybe not be that popular, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is that you have the skills that we're looking for, and our attitude is we'll teach you what we need you to know. So if someone wants to compete, become a Foreign Service officer, one thing they have to do is choose from the 5 career tracks. And I'll start with consular. Consular is what I call the retail of the U.S. Foreign Service. And I gave you an example of some of their work already, working with American citizens. We call that American Citizen Services. And part of their charge is to ensure that American citizens are taken care of whenever called on abroad. Additionally, they issue visas. So visas are nothing more than permissions from the US government for people who are not from the US, not US citizens, to enter the country. And for example, if the foreign student wanted to go to school there, they would have to talk to a consular officer and get a student visa that would have certain conditions for them to enter and exit the US. Another position, I'm going to skip over here and go to management. And again, that's what I am. I'm a management officer. And this area is pretty much like it sounds. It is the closest to what you're going to find in the private sector. And the management officer, that's me right there. That's the management officer. But underneath it, the ones who report include facility managers, IT, even our medical office. So the doctor may report. We also have our logistics people, finance people, human resources. Normally, when you're at an embassy or consulate, just because of the broad nature of management, it tends to be one of the largest sections in the building, if not the largest. Another is public diplomacy. Public diplomacy, I call the face of U.S. Foreign Service, because these are our people who handle the social media. They interview with a journalist. They write speeches. And whenever there's a VIP visitor, they're usually around trying to make sure that that visitor is presented in the way the US government wants them to be presented. Now, I saved economic and political for last because I always put them together and say they're essentially the same job. What they are is they're what we call reporting officers. And the question is, what do they report? Well, you can see it right there. Economic officers report on economic issues, political officers on political issues. So the reality is, much of their time is spent gathering information. We are not an intelligence agency, but that doesn't mean we don't gather intelligence. Much of the information we gather is open source, meaning that anybody who knows where to look can find it. It's public information. But where the economic and political officers really do their job is when they gather humans, which is human intelligence. And all that is networking, finding people in the government or the private sector or abroad who can give information that they can share back with Washington, so Washington better understands what's going on the ground in that country. Uncle Sam does not like surprises, so it's imperative that the political and econ officers are keeping everybody in Washington apprised as to what's going on in their country. Now, information goes the other way. So if Washington has a message to deliver to, let's say, the head of state in a foreign country, it's usually either the econ or political officers who are going to deliver those messages. So I just said, you can major in biology and become an econ officer if you can demonstrate in the process that you excel in these 13 dimensions. So I'm not going to go through all of them because you can find all these at careers.state.gov and you'll find more definition around them. But essentially, what the candidate would have to do is show, I have examples that I think are transferable in each of these 13 dimensions from whatever I've been doing, whatever I studied, whatever I majored in, or what prior work experience I have. And that's what they're measured on when they compete to become Foreign Service officers. I'm just going to point out three because in my opinion, these are the most important. I'm sure some of my colleagues in the state might not agree. Initiative and leadership. I point this out because one thing is, one should expect from their first tour to maybe their last tour that they are going to be supervising. It costs Uncle Sam usually over $700,000 to send one of us overseas for an average 3-year tour. So that's expensive. And the reality is we're over there not to do the hands-on work. That's why we have our locally employed staff. We're over there to supervise and manage and ensure that the mission goals are being met within our department. So leadership and supervisory skills are an imperative no matter what your career track is. Another is cultural adaptability. And this is kind of unique to us or other foreign affairs agencies. You can be the best at whatever it is your skill is in the States or in an environment you're comfortable with. But if we picked you up and took you and dropped you in another country where they do things differently, and maybe you just started practicing that language 8 months prior, and so it's your second language and you really don't know how to communicate as well as you'd like, are you going to crash and burn? Or are you just going to look at it like, well, part of the job, let me learn it, get better at it, and go? That's what we call cultural adaptability. And that's huge for us. And the last one I'll mention, because it's kind of the umbrella, and this is why I put it on top, is judgment. The reality is, like I said, there are over close to 300 different posts we have spread across the world. So anytime Uncle Sam decides here's a foreign policy issue that we want spread around the world, that means each and every one of these embassies and consulates has to interpret it and provide that information the way it should be interpreted in that environment. Because different places in the world, they receive information differently. And so we expect our officers to have a certain judgment to know how to communicate in their country, how to push back or how to clarify to Washington how this information will be received. So judgment is huge. So we talked about the officers / generalists. Now we're going to go through the Foreign Service Specialist career tracks. Again, we have administrative jobs. We have construction engineering. Someone has to build the embassies and consulates abroad. We have facility management. Someone has to take care of those embassies and consulates that are built. IT, and believe it or not, this is the one career track that we are having our biggest problem recruiting. And the reason is IT tends not to think of us as where you're going to find a job. People don't say, oh, I want to go into IT so I can be at an embassy abroad and work with security, secure data. It just doesn't really cross their minds. But not only are we looking for IT personnel who have that technical skill, they have to be good what? Leaders and supervisors, because they can expect to do not the hands-on coding. They're going to do project management type work. They're going to have to manage help desks. And here's one key thing. They have to be able to take technical information and translate it into layman's language. So maybe someone as high as an ambassador can understand what they're talking about when it's a complicated IT or some sort of connectivity related responsibility. We have a small group of people dealing with international information English language programs. I mentioned we have medical clinics around the world. So we have doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, office management, which is clerical. And the last group here is law enforcement and security, which nobody refers to by that name. You may have heard of diplomatic security or DS. That's who we're talking about. And their job is as special agents or similar is to protect us essentially. So when we're abroad, they are responsible for our well-being and they do an excellent job. So now I'm going to talk about how to become, what's the process to become a Foreign Service diplomat. Let's start with the generalist. So for the Foreign Service Officer hiring process, it starts with taking the Foreign Service Officer test, the FSOT, at Pearson VUE, which is a private testing center. And this test includes multiple choice, it includes an essay, and it includes a personal narrative. So essentially what happens is we can expect somewhere between 50 to 60% of the people that pass the FSOT at any given time. So what that means is that all this information goes to a qualifications evaluation panel, and they have to sort through the people who passed and see who they want to invite in for an actual interview. But of course, us being in the government, we don't call it an interview, we call it an oral assessment. And what it is a grueling 5 to 6 hour day where normally candidates are brought in groups of 8 with people who are at the same stage in the process as they are. And they have a day where they go through the common interview process, some case studies they have to do, and also some group projects they have to do. And the entire time they do everything, they have examiners who are monitoring them and asking them questions, and they're trying to fill in the boxes for those 13 dimensions we talked about. If they pass the oral, they're actually given a score, and that score is just kind of put to the side, and they say, okay, now you go get your medical and security clearances. This is what slows the process down. And we tell people you should plan on about a year. It may be less and it may be more. A lot depends on a slew of factors. But the bottom line is this is usually what slows the process down, is getting specifically the security clearance. If the candidate gets the medical and security clearances, then they move on to a suitability review panel, which you should view no different than an admissions panel at a university. What they're doing is they're trying to make the binary decision. Do we want to invite this candidate to join the Foreign Service or not? And if they say, yes, we do, then they're going to go back and take that score from the oral assessment and they're going to rank order it on what we call our career track register. All that is a list of management, political, econ, PD, and consular, and the scores of each of the candidates. So a management person who scored highest would be number 1 on the management list. And then you go, let's say the next highest score here happened to be a political person. Then they would go number 1 on the political list. So they have their separate lists based on the hierarchy of scores. And what happens is when the A100 orientation class is set up, meaning that they're going to make a call to actually bring people off the register and take them to orientation so they can start their careers, they don't just take 1/5 of each. What they do is they base it on whatever the labor planning is. So they may say, we want 17 consular people, 15 political, and 12 management. And that's how they decide how to pull people off that list. So we talked about the FSO hiring process. Foreign Service Specialist process is very, very similar with just a couple of small exceptions. Instead of them starting with the Pearson VUE test, they first start by applying at usajobs.gov. What you should do, everybody should do, especially underclass students, freshmen and sophomores, what they should do, everybody should do it, but a lot of times freshmen and sophomores don't think about it. What you should do is go to usajobs.gov, set up an account and a profile, and you can put a tickler in there that will notify you whenever something that matches your interest becomes open. These are called vacancy announcements. We use these for our internships and for other fellowship student opportunities many times. And this is not just a State Department thing. This is an entire federal government thing. So other agencies use this as well. So if you set up this account with your notifications, you will start to get notified so you don't miss any deadlines. And here's the other thing, and this is why I emphasize freshmen and sophomores should start paying attention. If you put something in there for, let's say, public diplomacy, you say, I'm kind of interested in public diplomacy. Even though you know you're a long way from actually working in the field because you're just starting school, as you look at these vacancy announcements as they pop up, you'll see what the employer is looking for. And you can start to plan either your classes or internships that you're going to pursue based on that. So it gives you a picture of what someone wants to use with the skills that you think you have or will have when you graduate. The other difference in the process for them is the oral assessment. They not only have the oral assessment where they have to go through those dimensions to be graded on that, they have to take a competency exam. So unlike the officers, when they start, they are expected to have expertise in their field. So a finance person is going to have to take a finance exam. HR is going to have to take an HR exam. Now, they can receive training once they are hired, but ultimately they have to come in with already having skill in whatever their competency is. After that, the process is exactly the same as it was for officers. So now we're going to our last section. We'll talk about student programs, and then we'll go over to any questions you may have. The first opportunity I want to talk about, I'm going to point out because it's currently open. Much of ours have already closed, and just to make sure everybody understands that for any of these student opportunities, you do have to be a U.S. citizen. Doesn't matter if you were naturalized or born in the U.S., but they all require some sort of security clearance, and that's why they have to have citizenship. But remember I told you we're short on IT personnel? We're so short that a few years ago, they created this Foreign Affairs Technology Fellowship we refer to as FATE. And this encourages applications for members of groups that have been historically underrepresented in the U.S. Foreign Service. It's a program that provides academic funding of up to $37,500 annually for tuition, room and board, books, mandatory fees, and some travel expense. So it's a 2-year fellowship. The 2-year fellowship is something that can be used for junior and senior years of undergraduate study or a master's degree in an IT-related field. So someone would be eligible if they are currently a sophomore. The deadline for applying is February 1. So if you're currently a sophomore and you know you want to major in IT or a related IT field, then you could apply by February 1. And if you get a fellowship, it would pay for your junior and senior years, including internships during the summer. If someone is a senior and they want to go on and get a master's degree in an IT-related field, regardless of what their undergraduate major is. So it's pretty unusual to have people go from, let's say, sociology to IT for a master's. What's more common is something kind of similar, like operations or something in business, but that's not that unusual for people to be kind of in the technical field and want to go in an IT field for a master's degree. Well, they would be eligible. And the other group that would be eligible would be someone who's already graduated. So someone may have graduated a few years ago and they're actually working right now, and they've decided they want to go back and get a master's degree so they can become a foreign service IT specialist. They'd be eligible as well. I mentioned the internships. The way they're organized is we have domestic internship after the first year of study that would be at Maine State. The other internship would be abroad after the second year of study. And then after that, they would join the U.S. Foreign Service for a minimum of 5 years. We're kind of like ROTC. We're paying for it, so Uncle Sam wants a return on the investment. But the reality is that our people normally 5 years is nothing. They're moving along in those careers. So our fellows tend to stay in for full careers. For eligibility, you mentioned they have to be U.S. citizens and they will be enrolling in an IT undergraduate program or master's degree program. They have to be the ages of 20 and 59, able to secure medical clearance and top secret security clearance. They have to enter and maintain a 3.2 GPA on a 4.0 scale. Students who are currently completing their associate's degree, but they're going on to a 4-year school to get their junior and senior year paid for would be eligible, and also online. So for this program, online degree programs that are US accredited are eligible. So a different program we have, so we talked FATE, now I'm going to talk about the Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program. And this program is closing on the 9th of February, so there is time left. This is a fantastic program. Oh my goodness. The catch is it's very competitive. But this program is a 6-week summer program that they try to bring a deeper appreciation and understanding of international affairs and careers. And again, it welcomes applications from members of groups that have been historically underrepresented, including those with who identified financial need. Now, it's basically what that means is we're polishing you. We're trying to prepare you. So if you choose to go on to compete for the Foreign Service job, you will have a lot of training already in hand. At the time of application and deadline, they have to be full-time undergraduate U.S. citizen students, at least sophomore status. Sophomores, juniors, seniors are eligible. I did say seniors. They'd be eligible for this program. Have to, again, cumulative 3.2 on a 4.0 scale. And the way it works is the scholars, we call them scholars, they would go to Howard University, stay on campus and get that paid for, and they would attend 2 courses and a seminar that enhances their knowledge and skills. So these are college level courses on foreign policy, economics, and writing. So your school may accept them. You might be able to get credit for those courses. At the same time, the scholars are being introduced to the government and understanding how government, their foreign affairs agencies interface with U.S. Department of State and the Foreign Service. If we're not in the time of COVID, they get to go on these fun field trips to the different agencies and learn about those. And every blue moon, they're actually called in because we need help with the Department of State. And we say, hey, let's get some of those scholars to help us. And here's the best part. You get a stipend of $3,200. So you're basically getting paid to take classes for free, and your housing's paid for, and your meals are paid for, and some of your travel is paid for. And it doesn't come with any service commitment. So unlike the FATE, if you finish the program, you may say, this is a fantastic experience, but I don't think I'm ready, or I don't want to pursue this. That's it. There's no commitment. The other student opportunities I'll go through, the deadlines are pretty much passed for summer 2021. And the reason that happened is because, again, we have to get these security clearances, and we have to get the students to apply early so we don't have a problem with those clearances. The Wrangell Graduate Fellowship Program and the Pickering are very, very, very similar programs. These pay for a 2-year master's degree, and you'd have to get your master's degree in something that's relevant to those 5 career tracks we talked about. And again, a fantastic program. Once they complete that program, including the internships domestically and abroad, and they get the stipend for that, they would then have that 5-year commitment in the U.S. Foreign Service, similar to the FATE. Our most common internship program is this one right here. It's the U.S. Department of State Student Internship Program. It's an unpaid domestic and international internship that's eligible would be sophomore, junior, and senior. You can always find out this information at careers.state.gov. So I encourage everybody to go there first. And what you'll see is links to other things that may be usajobs.gov. So if you set up your notification in usajobs.gov, you would then get a ping whenever these internships are open up. And these internships, like I said, they may be at embassies or consulates abroad, and they also have a lot in DC. And I always encourage anybody who's competing for an internship to at least look at one that's in DC, because those, you really learn a lot. And it's since it's unpaid, it's cheaper, it's easier to live. Virtual Student Federal Internship, VSFS, is open to sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and this is another good program. And another reason you need to register at usajobs.gov, because they announce this when nobody's thinking about internships, usually July 1. And then it closes the last day in July. And then they start their internship as soon as school starts in September. So in this case, this is a program before COVID. It was already a virtual program. And this is one where the student performs basically work that's going to be more project-oriented work. They get their assignments on a weekly basis, and they commit 10 hours a week to completing those assignments. And keep in mind that since it's a small group situation, sometimes one-on-one, they'll be interfacing on a weekly basis with Foreign Service officers, specialists. So they're essentially getting mentored. Pathways paid internships. VSFS and Pathways are federal government programs, not just Department of State. So any interested student should look not just Department of State, look at other agencies as well. The Pathways paid internship is also very competitive. It is undergrad and grad. You can find out more at usajobs.gov or careers.state.gov, but these are quarterly, and many times they require the students to be in DC. So since they're quarterly, students might have to take a semester off if they're going to be doing these internships. Again, the virtual concept is still a little bit evolving, but find out as much as you can in advance if you are interested in any of these. The last one I'll mention, and then we'll start going to the questions, is our USFSIP. And essentially what this is another fantastic program where the students would have 2 summer internships, meaning this is for current sophomores or juniors who would have demonstrated financial aid. They're going to get instruction, not classes like the Wrangle Summer Enrichment, but they're just going to get some instruction, some guidance, and maybe some training, have their internships, and they're basically working. They're learning about the actual work being done in the foreign service. The key thing here, and again, this is competitive as well, is 1/3 of what they're being judged on in their application is financial need. Oops, so with that, here's my summary page. Again, I can be contacted at dirsouth@state.gov, and I encourage everybody to go through careers.state.gov, and as you see, it will lead to more information at usajobs.gov. I will stop my share and start fielding the questions. All right, so if anybody has any questions, you can just, we're a small group, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Okay.
Go ahead, Randy. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Scared someone else is going to start talking when I started talking.
Okay.
My question is, can you talk a little bit about any challenges that have come up during your line of work, especially being overseas, like any challenges that you've experienced?
I could talk about loads of challenges, but the reality is, what happens in life is some people, and you hear people, it sounds like it's schmuck stuff, they're opportunities. And remember I talked about cultural adaptability? That's a good way of looking at it. That some things people look at as challenges, other people look at as, hey, this is an opportunity. And so I can give you some examples, but essentially what I always encourage people to do is think what's important to them, and then ask really, have you come across this and had to deal with that? So let me just think of some. I'm in management, so a lot of the stuff I have is very administrative. You have to get stuff filed and things like that, make sure it's done properly and getting permits and everything else. Well, I was in Mexico, and basically to get our students enrolled in the local high school, we had to get the Secretary of State's signature. They were expecting Hillary Clinton to be signing certificates so students could go to the local high school. That was because they weren't used to dealing with diplomats and they didn't know processes. So the bottom line was, this was a challenge I didn't expect on the business side. And lo and behold, I discovered through my work that there's actually one person in DC who was authorized to sign for the Secretary of State because of these little quirks around the world where they expect the Secretary of State to be signing on something as mundane as getting your kid in a local high school. Let me think of one that's more of like an international lifestyle challenge. And that may be, I was in Dubai. And so Dubai, if anybody visits Dubai, they're probably gonna have loads of fun, because if there's a Sheikh Zayed Highway is like 95 or 85, 75, and it cuts right up through the city. And on one side, on the beach side, is usually where the tourists go. And literally 10 minutes out, if you go on the other side, it's more like the Middle East. So one side is very westernized, And you go on the other side, and I'll just say it's not. So we had to deal with a lot of cultural issues that we experienced on a regular basis that people who were just visiting didn't even know existed. And since I had daughters in school, a lot of the cultural issues there were based on sex, meaning that males were treated one way and females different. And so some of that may have seemed different to us. And I will say, in one specific case, it was a problem for me because it required segregation on the buses by sex. And we grew up that way in the States. And so this is something where we had to adjust to understand how to live and work in an environment where the culture was very different on a daily basis, keeping in mind that people who hadn't been to Dubai, they looked at TV and thought it was like Las Vegas. So we had those other things to overcome as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, it's a small group. If anybody has anything specific, like, what concerns me is this, feel free to ask it.
Could you talk about, or can you offer some insight in how best to prepare for the Foreign Service Officer, like the initial test?
Yes, I could spend a long time talking about it, but the good thing is you can read about it. And if you go to careers.state.gov and click on Foreign Service Officer, it goes through excruciating detail about that entire process I talked about. It even has some sample questions so you can get an idea of the questions. Essentially, here, I'm going to give you the short version. The only part you can really study for is that multiple choice section when you sit down and take the online test at Pearson VUE. That's going to be talking about things like government, the Constitution, major world affairs that have happened over the last 100 years. It doesn't mean you have to memorize the Constitution, but if they refer to it in a question, you want to know what they're talking about. You want to recognize it. Geography, world history. So nothing you haven't learned before, but you have to dust off those books and go back and study a little bit more. I remember I got a question about the Gobi Desert, and I was trying to remember, Gobi Desert? I didn't memorize deserts. I was memorizing state capitals and world capitals, but I didn't think about that. So it's really just trying to test that part. The rest of it tends to go more towards those dimensions. So when they're looking at what you're writing, they're looking for you not only to show them how well you can write, but also how you can present information about yourself and your interests and your motivations that are focused on those dimensions. And the reality is, if you pass that FSOT and get on to head towards the orals, from that point forward, it is straight 13 dimensions. You can't study much for that at all. You can't study at all. You just have to be able to understand how to present your information in a way that they want to hear it, that best represents you. But all this to say, nothing that came out of my mouth just now you can't find at careers.state.gov. Another thing I would suggest is they call it a quiz. It's really an assessment. You click on it and you put in your interest, and it shows you our opinion of which career track we think matches your interest. And the reason it does make a difference is because we don't always use the same terminology that the private sector may. I was an undergrad in econ, so I thought I'd be economics or management. When I took that quiz, it said consular or management. And the reason is when I understood the actual work, the economics we're talking about is more like applied economics. You're not doing theory. It's more like you just have to understand the economic concepts. You can read the Wall Street Journal and explain that to somebody. That's kind of the applied part. And that's what our economic officers really get involved in. They're not doing regression analysis. So this quiz helps you understand where your interests really are and how they line up with the career options. Anything else?
It sounds like from what you're saying that it wouldn't hurt for students who think they might be interested to, say, use the resources of Oglethorpe's global education to get experience abroad. And
I would encourage that wholeheartedly. And at this stage, I tell everybody, cast a broad net. Okay, don't try to narrow it down yet because you have so much to learn, especially if you're a freshman or sophomore. If you're a senior, you're starting to get you're starting to know what direction you want to go, you better be. But if you're an underclassman, you cast a broad net and go where the opportunities are. So for example, I tell everybody, don't look for internships based on the agency. Don't say, I want to go to Department of State. I want to go to CIA. What you do is you say, what are my interests? If they're in public policy and government, then I'm going to put in usajobs.gov, public policy and government. And you may be surprised to find out that they may have some of that at some agencies you never thought of. And it might be less competitive and might be a way for you to get in. But if you get in, 50% of what you're going to be doing is directly transferable to any other agency. And keep in mind, now you're building your resume and you're legitimately building your expertise. So I had a student who was telling me, oh, I didn't get an internship with State Department. I got an offer with IRS. And I said, take it, because that's now going to start something you can build on. And again, 50% of what you're going to be doing will be directly transferable if you want to go for an internship with State next summer, or if you're going to be graduating and looking for a full-time job. Let me real quickly, because this is kind of in that same area, languages. Okay, languages. A lot of students say, oh, I speak 3 languages. That's nice. And we do have a language requirement that you have to, we call it master, you don't really master, you have to pass the test in at least 1 language. But essentially, we are looking for people who are going to be doing these careers. So if somebody speaks the language, that helps them with that career, not the other way around. And I talk to students sometimes who get very focused on the language and they don't think to themselves, yeah, but I actually have to be a consular officer with this language as opposed to just getting to speak French and Spanish and Greek all day long. No, you got to do your consular work. So that's one thing I would say is when you're studying anything global, you have to not only say the language, you have to say the culture, but also be thinking, what can I do from this experience that I can answer a question if I'm asked about one of those 13 dimensions? What am I doing right now in this international program that I can relate to one of those 13 dimensions? Anything else anybody has? All right, then again, I see my emails in chat. It is dirsouth@state.gov. And if anybody does want to talk to me, just shoot me an email and we can set up a time to talk. Keep in mind that this is a process, and so it is a challenging process. It's very competitive. So just keep casting a broad net. And as you go along, you'll start learning more and more and more, and it'll help you decide what directions you want to go through the next few years of your life and your career.
Thank you so much. I like to give a couple extra minutes for questions because virtual seems to put everyone on delay, but it's been a long day for everyone, and I appreciate everyone joining and taking note of the websites that were shared. I will send out this presentation and make sure that the recording is available on the Ogle YouTube. So if you want to go back and refer to anything or share with a friend, you'll know where to find it. Thank you again so much, Mr. DuBose, for joining us tonight and for spending the time talking about the exciting careers and even events in your life that come from those careers. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Okay.